All right, everybody. So, how are you doing today? So, here's a bit of international news, which is my main coverage that affects us all on a profound level. Last one from Ruptly today, or RT. Wait, U.S. and U.K. doctors warn against hormone surgery for trans-identified kids. Yeah, gee, no wonder. Because it's screwing them up and making them more likely to get cancer, you know? Just talking sense here. Just talking sense, my dude. Medical professionals in the U.S. and UK are sounding the alarm about the growing use of hormonal and surgical interventions for children who are confused about their gender identity, saying that more studies are required. Members of the conservative children's advocacy group, the American College of Pediatricians, wrote a letter on Monday to the Surgeon General of the United States warning about the effects of gender reassignment surgeries and hormonal drugs on minors, saying such interventions have not undergone a long-term study. The ACP called the issue to a grave public health concern and said that the drastic methods have become the new standard of care in lieu of ethical psychotherapy for children and teens who present with gender dysphoria. Yeah, you remember that incident with like the 12-year-old who said he wanted to be a girl and then later changed his mind after the surgery had almost taken place? Like it was almost too late? This is what happens when you normalize a mental illness, when you make it normal and not something that should be treated as precisely what it is, a condition. And yes, this does come from someone who is at least a little bit mentally ill. I myself do not have gender dysphoria, but I experience fits of intrusive thought. Occasionally manifesting in the form of flashbacks, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not. They can also sometimes take on the form of involuntary thoughts and, fantasies and even hallucinations. So, that's fun. And sometimes that gets a hold of my arachnophobia, and sometimes I have a hallucination about a person-sized spider just right behind me, Ugh, don't even want to think about it. So yeah, I know a thing or two about mental illness since I experience it almost every day. But enough about me. The ACP letter cites research which claims that the 61-98% of youth affected by GD, or gender dysphoria, not to be confused with goddamn, will outgrow it if allowed to progress through natural puberty. Oh yeah, many of them honestly do outgrow it. It's literally just a phase they're going through. The group also laments that healthcare professionals are increasingly prohibited from investigation psychosocial factors which may have led to GDP symptoms and fear being personalized or accused of discrimination. Or, no, not personalized, penalized. Why did I read it as personalized? God, I need to get my eyes checked. Dual warnings. The warnings are coming from both sides of the pond. Earlier this month, the Royal College of General Practitioners cautioned that there is a lack of robust evidence about the long-term effects of puberty blockers and hormonal drugs. In a 12-page position paper, the RCGP complained that family doctors were under pressure to provide gender dysphoria services that lie outside the remit of their generalist expertise. The paper advises that more research is needed on the pros and cons of medical treatment versus a less dramatic wait-and-see approach. A wait-and-see approach would be wise. It's just sad that they had to come to this conclusion after two different medical organizations had to come together and say this. This should have been common sense right from the get-go. Maybe just not let young children and preteens make such drastic decisions for themselves, since obviously they're not going to know what the hell they're doing. They are not old or experienced enough to understand the truth of how this sort of thing actually works. Medical treatment of children with GD often begins with prescription puberty blockers, which are given to halt normal onset of puberty. Next, the child is given cross-sex hormones, in other words, hormones which match their stated identity rather than their biologically assigned sex. There's that word again. At a large state, the patients undergo gender reassignment surgery. The side effects of these interventions can include sterility, sexual dysfunction, surgical complications, thromboembolic and cardiovascular disease. Oh, like in thrombosis, gotcha. Osteoporosis, malignancy, and persistently elevated rates of suicide. Right, because they're taking hormones that their body's not used to, and the emotional effect of that could lead to suicidal behavior. The medical warnings come as the UK's only child gender clinic, the Gender Identity Development Service, or GIDS, excuse me, creating GIDS kids, reported significant increases in the number of children seeking to transition to the opposite gender, an overwhelming majority of them, 70%, being young girls seeking transition to a male identity. The Sunday Times reported on the surge last month, noting that the majority, 54% of the children referred to the clinic, are 14 or under. In the UK, 17-year-olds are now allowed to be seen in adult gender clinics and to independently consent to treatment. The newspaper also recalled that a review in the new wave of girls seeking to transition had been ordered by the former Equalities Minister Penny Mordaunt last year, but little has been heard of it since. While transgender rights activists argue that the huge increase are due to growing public acceptance of a previously taboo issue, skeptics say that impressionable children are being confused by activists who promote the idea of changing genders and who pressure health professionals to immediately accept a child's assertion that he or she is the opposite sex rather than first exploring psychological reasons why a child may feel that way. Yeah, they don't want you to question it, because they think that if you do, that makes you transphobic. And, you know, hey, when I was a kid, they called that shit being a tomboy. So, I mean, what changed? I'll tell you what changed. It's the frickin' progressives. They're pushing it. Transgender, so here we go. So here's the final stretch, as I'm jumping all over the place a little bit. I used to keep notes to prevent this sort of thing, but I stopped caring. The RCGP warning was shortly followed by claims from a National Health Service, or NHS, psychologist, who said poor and potentially abused children are being misdiagnosed as transgender. Dr. Kirsty Entwistle, a former GIDS worker, said children can present with GD due to a traumatic early experiences, including sexual abuse, but those cases are not being investigated properly because medical professionals fear being labeled transphobic. Entwistle said she left GIDS after being accused of transphobia herself after raising concerns over the skyrocketing number of young people identifying as transgender. She also claims that GIDS staff tell parents of children that the effects of puberty blockers are fully reversible despite a lack of evidence on the effect that drugs have on children's brains. The BBC reported on Monday that GIDS lowered the age it offered kids puberty blockers based on a study which is being investigated by the Health Research Authority. The drugs which are given to children as young as 11-year-olds in Britain could be linked to increases in suicidal thoughts. Detransitioning? Some recent reports has also explored the phenomenon of the detransitioners, individuals who believe themselves to be transgender before changing their minds and deciding to transition back to their original biological gender. The detransitioners are thought to make up a very small number of the adult trans population. But the story seems to be different for children. A study in the journal The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry found that 2/3 of adolescent patients at a clinic in Amsterdam ended up identifying as their original birth-assigned gender. Another study, often called into question by trans activists, found that up to 80% of the trans kids eventually identified as their birth sex. Canadian sex researcher James Cantor wrote in a blog post in 2016 that only very few trans kids still want to transition by the time they are adults. Instead, he claimed they generally turn out to be regular gay or lesbian folks. Yep. It's a man-made phenomenon. It's not real. It's not naturally occurring. It's a panic. It's sort of a zeitgeist. Think of it as sort of like the Satanic Panic, and a lot of it uses the same psychological mechanisms, the sort of leading questions and sort of faux psychological techniques that ended up creating false memories or false perceptions. Which, by the way, led to some people's lives being totally ruined, by the way. And this will also be of a similar nature. It will ruin people's lives and will ruin their fertility. Say bye-bye to human reproduction if this becomes more common. But yeah, there you go. I mean, people are detransitioning. People are waking up to realize that this shit is complete nonsense, dreamt up by some madman. Anyway,